Welcome to the Businesstalk podcast. I am your host Deepak from India. Today we have the privilege of welcoming Dr. Andrew Hoffman as our distinguished guest on the podcast. Dr. Andrew Hoffman is the Holcim Professor of Sustainable Enterprise at the University of Michigan, jointly appointed as the Ross School of Business and the School for Environment and Sustainability. His research examines the cultural and institutional dimensions of environmental issues in business, with a focus on climate change and organizational transformation. Author of 19 books and over 100 scholarly works, Dr. Hoffman's insights have been featured in leading outlets such as the New York Times, Scientific American, and National Public Radio. Before entering academia, he worked with the US Environmental Protection Agency and in the private sector on sustainability and environmental management. Dr. Hoffman has received numerous honors for his scholarships and teaching, including the UNPRMA Teaching Award, RRBM Best Book Award, and multiple accolades from the Espin Institute, Academy of Management, and American Chemical Society, among others. Recognizing his outstanding contributions to sustainable enterprise and responsible management education. He has served on research committees for leading institutions, including National Academies of Science, the Johnson Foundation, the Climate Group, the China Council for International Cooperation on Environment and Development, and the Environmental Defense Fund. Dr. Andrew was recently named the 2025 MBA Professor of the Year by Poets and Quants, recognized for his pioneering efforts to reform business education and promote the concept of management as a calling. Dr. Hoffman earned his PhD and MS from the MIT and his BS from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. In today's episode, Dr. Andrew Hoffman discusses key insights from his acclaimed book, Business School and the Noble Purpose of the Market, correcting the systemic failure of shareholder capitalism, exploring how business schools can help redefine the market's role in serving society. Let's not keep you waiting. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrew Hoffman to the conversation. Dr. Hoffman, we are deeply honored by your presence and grateful for your time with us today.
It's my pleasure, Deepak. Thanks for inviting me.
Professor, business schools were originally founded to align commerce with service to society. Yet, you argue they have drifted into skill shops and networking hubs. How did this shift happen and what we have lost in the transition?
Well, that idea is not originally mine. It comes from Rakesh Khurana's book, From Higher Aims to Hired Hands. And what he describes is that when business schools were first proposed, particularly in the United States in the early 1900s, universities balked and said, this really isn't a serious area of academic inquiry. And they said, no, we're going to teach the titans of industry how to run commerce and service to society. We're going to teach people in business like we teach doctors to serve. And the conclusion of his book is we've missed that mandate and we've become skill shops. And I see that in my own experience in business schools. What we're primarily concerned about are, um, selling this product called the MBA, and students come to us so they can access a network that wouldn't be otherwise available to them if they didn't come to our schools. And so there we've lost some of that deeper connection to the idea of service to society, which is a big focus of what I've been trying to address is how do we bring in the idea of management as a calling? And I'm finding our students are resonant with that idea. The curriculum just hasn't caught up.
Professor, you describe climate change and inequality as systematic challenges that contemporary capitalism is failing to address. How do you
Mhm.
define systemic failure in the context of shareholder capitalism, and what are the clearest symptoms business students should recognize?
Well, I mean, when I'm highlighting climate change as one of uh, a broader set of environmental challenges, species extinction, freshwater availability, um, the planetary boundaries that scientists say mark the Anthropocene, and the idea of the Anthropocene that we have become through our massive growth in population and power of technology, animating forces in the environment. I mean, when I was born in 1961, there were 3 billion people on Earth. Today there are 7.5. I mean, think about that for a second. Um, it took Homo sapiens how many millennia to go from 0 to 3, and then in my short lifetime, we've gone up by 250%. So um, that has elevated us to a very powerful position within the environment where we are altering systems of the earth. And these are not unintended consequences. They are not externalities. They are the product of the system as it's designed. Similar with inequality, Thomas Piketty made it quite clear in his book Capital that the system it elevates, exaggerates, exacerbates income inequality, and we've seen that. The growing wealth in the upper strata, and more importantly, the political power that comes with that wealth, such that they become disconnected from the realities that many people live, and they have a disproportionate influence on the political process, and that just becomes a reinforcing loop. More power, less regulation, more money, more power, less regulation. And we need to get ourselves out of those loops. And so I highlight those two issues just as ways to say that the system is doing what it's designed to do, and we in business schools are teaching people that system. If we want to play a role in adjusting and correcting that system, we need to change what we teach.
Professor, the book calls for moving beyond the primacy of shareholder value as the central organizing principle of business.
Yeah.
What does a noble purpose of the market look like in practice? And how does it reframe the role of the firm?
Well, I like to go to Peter Drucker's definition that the purpose of a firm is to identify and serve a market. How well it does this is measured by how much money they make. And if you invert that relationship and a company just starts focusing on quarterly returns or profits for the shareholder, um, if that causes compromises in the quality of the product, the company is not sustainable. Certainly, we can take a look at the example of Boeing. Used to be a company that provided high quality products and then started to shift their emphasis, really focused on quarterly returns, on outsourcing manufacturing, and their products are failing, and the company is in free fall. Um, and so it's a much more useful definition in a management school. I understand why economists like to use shareholder value as the purpose. It's a nice, easy metric for their equations. But when we're teaching people how to run businesses, really losing sight of the fundamentals is detrimental to business. And the fundamentals are how do you provide a product that people want to buy? How do you keep serving the customer? Once you lose sight of the customer, you've lost sight of the fundamentals of the business. In terms of teaching management, I think that's a much more useful definition.
Professor, many MBAs you speak with feel a gap between the world's urgent problems and what they are taught in the classroom. What are
Yeah.
the most important missing pieces in current business curricula that this book tries to supply?
Well, I mean, we really teach the idea that numerous pieces, but we teach that the firm is separate from its natural and social environment, when in fact it's highly connected. We don't really teach students the concept of being stewards of the market, to be thoughtful and responsive and responsible for the system in which they practice their craft. And so I'd like us to teach students more about what is capitalism, how has it evolved, what are its multiple forms. Um, we need to teach more about what is the proper role between government and business. What is the role of lobbying in public policy? What is the role of government in the market? We really give a little attention to that. We teach that the primary metric of value is monetary, when in fact there are other values at play. We teach that humans are inherently selfish. We become reinforcing on that. We teach that efficiency is always good, and that's not always true. And I think that's an important one because if you take a look at the political upheaval in the United States, one of the big beefs of the MAGA movement is that, globalization um, hurts the average person. And when we teach that efficiency is always good, we teach that while moving manufacturing to another country, that may get consumers a cheaper product. But what does it do to the community that's left behind? That doesn't come into our calculations, doesn't come into our analysis. We need to change that. And we need to start to think more about systems, teach students how the pieces fit together. We've lived with this, siloed, segmented curriculum for about 50 years now, not just within the business school, but between the business school and other schools on campus. And so, how do we get more integrative? How do we get more permeable between the schools? I love it when students from other schools come into my classroom. We need to see more of that. And so that's what I'm really trying to call out in the individual chapters in the book. Um, how do we think about sustainable consumption? How do we think about, you know, new conceptions of growth? Can you have unlimited growth in a finite planet? No. Are there different kinds of growth we can think about? Yeah, steady state growth, degrowth, decoupling. These are all concepts and models and ideas that are very useful for a 21st century context that I'd like to see more of in business education.
Professor, you argue that it is not enough to add an elective on sustainability or ESG. What kind of foundational concepts about capitalism, markets, and value must be rewritten across the course curriculum?
Well, I think that a lot of what I just said does address that, but one more that again, coming back to my core idea here is that to teach students management as a calling, as a vocation, and that requires a different way of approaching the education process. I can't tell someone their calling, their purpose; they have to find it. And so I have actually developed a course with funding from the Arthur Vining Davis Foundation called Management as a Calling, where I create an environment where students discern their calling on their own. And I'm excited that this generation of students is really they're really excited about, not all of them, but a significant number are excited about this opportunity to explore this sense of purpose and meaning in their lives because so many of our students want that in their work. Some companies have cynically jumped onto that, say, come to our company, we'll help you find your purpose. My advice to students is always buyer beware. But you alone are responsible for finding your purpose. There's a wonderful quote by Mark Twain. He said, the two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you'll find out why. And I tell my students, you had no choice in that first day. Your parents chose it for you. You're here. But you have everything to do with that second day. You have to discern it. You have to find it. And we as educators, I think, have a responsibility to put them in an environment and a context to help them find that. And that's been fun for me because it puts me in a different role as a professor. I'm not the knowledge expert standing in the room saying, here are the 5 steps to find your calling. I create an environment and a context where they can search for it and they can search for it together because they're surrounded by people who are asking the same questions. And so that's been very exciting and very fun. And, in many ways, it's almost like bringing, philosophy into business education, bring the humanities into business education. I'd like to see more of that because let's face it, our students coming out of business schools in business, they're going to have tremendous power. And are we developing the right kind of leaders with character, with wisdom, with judgment that can exercise that power to make an economy, to build an economy that works best for everybody? That's what I'm trying to create. I'd love to see more business schools do this.
Professor, one theme of the book is the crucial role of government as an arbiter of markets rather than an intrusion on them. How should business schools teach us relationship between business and government differently, especially around regulations and corporate political responsibility?
Yeah, I think that question it really has two parts. First, what is the role of government or business in policy making? It's strange to me that so few schools have courses on lobbying, and better yet, are they having courses on lobbying, for the public good, for building an economy that works for everybody, that works, that helps everybody achieve their objectives, their goals. That is the promise of capitalism. Individual initiative leads to success. How do we make sure that the system continues to do that? Lobbying rather than individual gamesmanship, lobbying for the public good is something that I think we should instill in our students. Take a stand and say this is the kind of society we want. And then the other side of the equation is what are the role of government in the market? And I don't think there's any serious scholar out there that would say that um, a market absent any form of government regulation will serve the public interest. It just won't. There is a role for government in the market. And, I think about people like Mariana Mazzucato, who's been doing some really important writing and speaking on this idea. I mean, think about that cell phone you have in your pocket. That would not have been possible without research funded by the government. A lot of that basic research was funded by government dollars, and then businesses picked up the products that came out of that, and then they built the cell phone. The internet came from the government. There's so many things that come from the government, and we are living in a time right now, particularly in the United States, where people are saying the government can't do anything good. The government does a lot of good, and we need to just teach students what that role is. I'll just finish by saying that I offered a course here at Michigan that was joint between the School of Government, Public Policy, and the School of Business on these two questions. And I asked the students halfway through, what do your peers think you're taking this class? And their answers, to my mind, highlight the problem. The students in business said, their peers said, why would you take a course on government? What does this have to do with business? Which is astonishingly naive and problematic. They should understand the role of government in the market. And especially as, in the Biden administration, industrial policy came in strong with the CHIPS Act, with the IRA, and certainly in the Trump administration, the intrusions into the market from the government in this administration have been significant. So we can't say it's not happening. The students from the School of Public Policy had an equally problematic answer. They said many of their peers said, you actually went in that building, you actually took a course there, they're the enemy. And that's also astonishingly naive and problematic. And so that speaks to my earlier point of breaking down the boundaries between schools. We should get students in public policy and students in business, future business leaders, future government leaders, to understand the interplay between the two and how they can delineate the proper role of each. And so that's what I've really tried to focus on.
Professor, the book lays out a multi-part program for change, from curriculum and pedagogy to faculty incentives and student rewards. If you were redesigning an MBA from scratch, what are the first three structural changes you would make?
If I had a magic wand, um, you know, there's no silver bullet here. So I'm very quick in this book to say I don't have all the answers. And I think one important thing to say is that I have ideas in this book. The biggest mistake any business school would make is just say, take these ideas and just apply them to our school and everything's going to be fine. Every school has its own context. Every school has its own culture and its own mission and objectives. And you have to pick and choose what works for your school. It reminds me, if you remember back in the day of total quality management, that was a program developed like GE, and everyone took it and tried to jam it in their own companies. And they made a lot of problems. And people started calling it totaled quality management because it totaled companies. And so I would begin with that. Understand what you're trying to do and make sure it fits. Beyond that, if I had a magic wand, I'd love to see schools either jettison the rankings or see more diversity in the rankings. The idea that this school is number one, that school is number two, like there's only one way to build a business school. I want to see more diversity in business schools. I want to see if you want to be this kind of leader, if you want to go into this kind of sector, you go to this kind of business school and have more room for diversity. If that means moving away from the rankings or pressuring the rankings to start to have more nuance, there's number one. Number two, I'd like to see the reward systems changed. Right now, professors are rewarded for research in schools like mine. It's research, teaching, and service, but it's research with a capital R, teaching with a small t, and service with an infinitesimal s. And so I'd like to see us shift that prioritization and elevate teaching, because that at the end of the day is our biggest influence on the world around us. And so how do we move away from, calling teaching a load and a burden that we'd love to shed to focus on research to say, this is what we do. And how do we add more engagement with the real world around us? I think that our focus on research is a kind of research, academic research for academic journals, which is written for other academics. And how do we change the reward system to allow professors focus on bringing their world into the world of practice that needs it? That's a totally different challenge. And I would add, not every professor has to do this, but we need to broaden the tent of the acceptable roles of what it means to be a professor so that some can do that, some can do the basic research, and together we can build knowledge that's useful to society.
Very insightful. Professor, you call for business leaders who can push beyond making the business case and ask harder moral and societal questions. How can educators practically cultivate this mindset and moral courage in future managers and executives?
Well, I mean, It goes back to the idea of my idea of management as a calling. I think we focus very heavily on the how of business, and we give very little attention to the why of business. What is business there to do? Why are you doing this? And to bring that front and center. Uh, I would love to see all students do this kind of examination, but it goes deeper. I mean, what we're talking about here is changing a system. And so you can change the curriculum, but you also need to change the admissions process. Who do you bring into a business school and start to screen for people who really see their role in business as something bigger? Because business can do wonderful, amazing things for society. I mean, the economy has grown significantly over the last 100 years. That has allowed a higher standard of living for all of us. Life expectancy has increased, per capita income has increased. Capitalism has done some pretty amazing things, and we need to, sort of rub out the rough edges and make some amendments to it to get it back on track for a 21st century reality. It needs some amending. And so the idea of management as a calling, the idea of serving, I keep coming back to that, but I think that speaks volumes for the kind of business school I'd like to see going forward. And then, you know, the, I heard a talk once by David Brooks, and he said something really interesting to me. He said, there are certain people you meet and you know what school they went to just by not just by the knowledge they have, but their outlook on the world and their place within it. How many business schools could say that? I fear very few. David Brooks says the way to create that kind of graduate is to have a coherent moral culture. And so that allows us to think about all the pieces. It's admissions, it's curriculum, it's recruiting, it's who we bring in as exemplars of the kind of people we want to produce. It's the co-curricular activities and the clubs. All these things matter for creating this coherent moral culture that produces leaders that we need for the 21st century.
What is your framework emphasis that capitalism is not monolithic? There are multiple variants around the world. How should business schools expose students to alternative models of capitalism? And what lessons are most urgent for a post-shareholder capitalism future?
Well, this is a very important question. I mean, just off the bat, I teach a course called Reexamining Capitalism. In the first class, I ask my students, can you define capitalism? And for most part, they can't. And I find that really ironic coming out of a top-tier business school and they can't define the very system in which they'll practice their craft. And this is even more important because surveys from Gallup show that Gen Z and millennials have become disenchanted with capitalism, and yet they can't define it. And so, how do we help them understand, what was capitalism as early incarnations? How has it evolved over time? It's a system that's continually evolving. What are its multiple forms? That is something that I try and teach them my class, Reexamining Capitalism, and I do expose them to multiple capitalisms around the world, and their mind is blown when they see Nordic capitalism. Now, that may be a model that can't work everywhere, but they have a huge safety net. They have a high tax rate. Um, do you want that kind of an economy? How you structure economy represents the values you believe as a society. And to show them there's a variant of capitalism in China, um, is surprising to them. And as the world continues to evolve and grow in the 21st century, the Western model of capitalism may not be applicable in all parts of the world. Is what we teach in an American business school applicable in India, all parts of India? Is it applicable in Africa? I'm not so sure that's true. And if we base our teaching on the assumption that it is, um, we may not be preparing our students for the economies that they'll face. We can also think about indigenous economies, indigenous knowledge within our own communities. The world is becoming much more heterogeneous, and I think we need to expose students to the heterogeneity in the models of capitalism and how it's practiced.
Professor, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question. For students, faculty, and administrators listening to this conversation, what is one concrete action each group can take this year to begin correcting the systematic failure of shareholder capitalism within their own institution?
Yeah, that's a great question because a book without any kind of action steps is you're the prophet saying repent, the end is near, but you need to really offer solutions. And so for me in each of those areas, I mean, I originally wrote this book for students, and decided to broaden it because we're talking about a systems change. But for students, I actually have a chapter in there that my advice for students is threefold. Um, recognize that business schools are broken. And we're seeing that students are starting to push back and say, this isn't the education I wanted. I mean, Poets and Quants had a three-part series a couple of months ago from students at Stanford saying we're not learning anything. Where's the rigor? And I'm seeing similar discontent here at Ross. I'm seeing it at Berkeley. I'm seeing it at schools around the country. And so something is happening where students are dissatisfied. So go recognize that the business school is not structured necessarily for what you want, but go anyway. The power to make a difference in the world is enormous from business. But the third and the most important is take control of your education. Interrogate the ideas they're teaching you. Don't just shoot them down, but question them, analyze them, understand their foundations. Um, get outside the business school. There are schools all here at the University of Michigan. We have 17 schools. And if you never leave the confines of the business school, you're missing out on the opportunity to learn from seminars or courses in government, in the environment, in engineering, in public policy, sociology, psychology, community engagement. You are dropped into a resource-rich environment. Take advantage of it all. And even further, I mean, the classes are one thing. If you come into the business school and just say, tell me what classes to take your classes for 2 years, think you got the best education, you've missed so much. There's so much learning in between the classes. You have opportunities to create your own education. Do an independent study. It allows you to learn something that is uniquely yours. Organize a conference, organize a seminar, invite a speaker. When you contact people in business, and say, I'm at such and such a business school, and I was wondering if you could come speak to the students. Business people like doing this, and you can build your network, gain your knowledge, get exposure to people on the front lines. And so take control of education, make it the most you can be. For faculty, um, my feeling, I mean, particularly for senior faculty, step outside the lines. I've advocated that I want to see more senior faculty act what I call elders. Um, uh, Stop worrying about adding more citation counts to your already high citation count, more academic articles, unless it's helping a junior faculty member, and really start to think about the next generation and how to change the system through which they're coming so that it better serves what we need in society. In many ways, it's just getting back. Why'd you get in the profession in the first place? Was it really just to amass citation counts, or do you want to make a difference in the world? I'm willing to bet most people would say make a difference in the world. I have an analogy I push on faculty is, particularly junior faculty, is think of your career like a jazz musician. And as a jazz musician, you have to start by learning your scales. You just do. Too bad. And so as a fledgling professor, you have to learn your craft. You have to learn how to do good research, how to be a good teacher. Over time, you'll learn how to play other people's music. And so as a professor, you'll learn how to hone your craft. And that gets us up to tenure. But the ultimate objective should be to be a jazz musician, to learn how to play your own music. There's something unique inside you. And this is the rare gift of being a full professor. You can define professor in any way you want. And so many professors just stay doing what they were doing as a junior professor. I have one colleague said the problem with our field is we have too many senior professors thinking like junior professors. Think like a jazz musician. What is your unique contribution to the world? Now, as a full professor, you can explore that and indulge it. And I encourage more professors to do that. And then administrators, it's all about changing the system. Can you change the reward system? Can you change the structure of the curriculum? Can you introduce more short modules? Can you or introduce different kinds of courses? Can you bring in executives as educators? You have an opportunity to change the system, and I would encourage you to do that. There's my answer of my magic wand of how I would change the world if I had that amazing power.
Thank you, Professor Andrew Hoffman, for sharing your time and wisdom with us today, and for challenging us to rethink the purpose of business education and market in society. Your insights will stay with our listeners, students, educators, and practitioners as they reflect on how to lead, teach, and design institutions that they truly serve the common good. Thank you once again.
Oh, thank you very much, Deepak. I enjoyed talking to you.